Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, and what's turned out to be a leadership special with the politics of power on full display all over the world this week. And as ever, I'll be looking at the biggest events of the past 7 days, distilling them with context into 45 minutes of clarity provided by 4 distinguished correspondents. The podcast version of this show is now in the top 10 of the best global podcasts on current affairs, according to millionpodcast.com. This week we're at number 8, believed to be the luckiest number in China. So thank you for watching and listening. In a week that's seen the world's superpowers take centre stage with President Trump in Beijing for the first state visit of a US leader in almost a decade, with tensions over trade, technology, Taiwan. What stayed tacitly implied was the deeper, more difficult question of whether the two alpha powers of world order can share the 21st century, or is it a confrontation, ultimately unavoidable? President Xi's long indicated he wants China to be number one military, economic and political force by 2049. But it was flattery and fanfare, smiles and waves, boys, in the Great Hall of the People. President Trump had vowed to make China pay for, quote, ripping us off like no one else has ever done before. But after a banquet of Beijing roast duck and crispy beef ribs, Trump toasted his great rival with the words, "You're a great leader. I say it to everybody." But on the question, when asked together on Taiwan, no comment.
How were your talks, sir?
Great.
Did you talk about Taiwan,
Great
Mr.
place.
President?
Incredible. China's beautiful.
特朗普总统说谈得很好。
Did you talk about Taiwan, Mr. President?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, did you talk about Taiwan?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Okay.
It's been a week of will they, won't they? Watch and wait in Westminster as the leadership challenge seemed likely against the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, a week on from the worst local election result in history for the governing Labour Party. Starmer dug his heels in while rumours spread of cabinet unrest and private calls for him to go. Downing Street insisted bigger issues were at hand than party navel-gazing like Iran, Ukraine. But once the pomp of the King's speech was over, including a heckle of "not now, Andy," as Black Rod knocked to enter Parliament, it was back to the question of political succession. Will it be Wes, Angela or the aforementioned Andy knocking at the Downing Street door? Well, Wes Streeting resigned from Cabinet. Angela Rayner was looking to be back in the frame. And for Andy Burnham, it's a question of plotting a route back to Parliament while the carry-on continues.
Treachery! Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me!
And it's been a week where President Macron has been on the move in Africa, jogging through the streets of Alexandria and taking morning runs in Nairobi with an Olympic marathon champion, and playing football too in the Kenyan capital, living his best life, according to the French paper Libération. He'll need to master the diplomatic equivalent of the Cruyff turn to succeed on his quest to pivot French interests from former colonies to carving out a new sphere of relevance in Anglophone Africa, where he was playing co-host of the Africa Forward Summit in Kenya, investing €14 billion, an ambitious reorientation in a fiercely competitive market dominated by China. There are new partnerships to be had, if only they'd listen.
And our beaches are dirty, so then...
Already? You're not waiting your turn.
I will make order. Excuse me, everybody. Hey! I'm sorry, guys. But it's impossible to speak about culture, to have people like that super inspired coming here, making a speech with such a noise. So this is a total lack of respect.
The top comment on YouTube was, "I want President Macron at every movie screening," which takes us to Cannes. In a week, the 79th Film Festival kicked off. Notably absent, Hollywood blockbuster premieres. The festival director, Thierry Frémaux, said it reflected wider industry changes. And organisers are also proposing labels for movies that indicate if they are AI-free. And the acclaimed director, Guillermo del Toro, rallied to the cause, letting his distaste for all things artificial be known. He's back for a special screening of Pan's Labyrinth, the film that still holds a record for the longest standing ovation at the festival, 22 minutes. Well, this year, the audience have so far got to their feet for 7 minutes for the satirical slasher Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. 1 more minute than the joint favourite to win the Palme d'Or, Fatherland, a black and white Cold War road trip set in 1949 Germany. Well, it's time to introduce a festival of panellists on the World This Week tonight, if I can invent a collective noun for tonight's guests. With me in the studio, I'm delighted to be joined by Doug Herbert. Good evening to you, Doug.
Evening, Gavin.
It is great to see Doug. A native New Yorker, spent his greenhorn years in journalism, covering the collapse of the Soviet Union from Moscow in the 90s for the New York Times, before heading on to the Philadelphia Inquirer, onto a career that's taken him to CNN, covering business and markets in the Big Apple EU, from London to France 24, where he's been resident international affairs commentator for 2 decades. And all that, Doug is still under 30. It is great to have you on the programme, Doug. I haven't asked you, because covering breaking news this week, have you been brushing up? Have you been watching Eurovision? Are you a fan? And will you watch this weekend?
You know something? I usually do watch each year, and then I hasten to not admit that I watched. I don't know. I guess it's an old tradition, my sort of secret stealth Eurovision viewing. UK, I think, always sort of crashes out, which always has astounded me. It has always made me wonder about Eurovision. But I guess I'm sort of loyal to it because, you always remember ABBA got its start there. So there was a time when Eurovision was, I guess, the arbiter for all of this sort of, tongue-in-cheek, sometimes ridicule it comes in for from those who don't watch it. I guess I'm a secret fan. And I am going to watch it this year. But then again, I shouldn't be admitting that, right?
70 years, Doug, since it first started. 70 years.
Unbelievable.
It attracts an audience of 150 to 200 million. 25 countries have made it through. 5 aren't taking part because of Israel's participation. The boycott is the largest in Eurovision history. I think it's fair to say there'll be nervousness this weekend because you've got the size of the audience, and amongst the escapism, there's the prospect of a live protest inside the venue.
Yeah, they've been talking about a live protest inside the venue, which they're probably going to try to hunker down and try to ward that to fend off any prospect of such. I'll just, one thing I was going to mention about the Eurovision, the one thing that I don't, it's the audience participation part, right? This is the one part where I sound very anti-democratic, but you always get to this fact, you have these judges and you have all these countries, you have a certain order. You're like, okay, it looks like this one is, sort of pole position to maybe take it this year. Then all of a sudden the audience weighs in. Like they have this whole democratic exercise. What's that about? And the whole thing is shuffled about. And the person that you least think emerges from like 40th place and ends up taking the prize.
Interesting. I would say unpopular opinion that you would just have a jury, not the audience stuff. Very interesting. Well, let's go 200 kilometres north of Paris to the city of Cannes and bring on our next guest, Emma Kate Simmons, the Paris-based writer, editor at Frank Tireur magazine, columnist at New World magazine as well. Good evening to you, Emma Kate. First of all, what's
Good evening.
taking you out to Normandy this week?
Right, well, it is actually a long weekend with a pont, or a bridge, as they say in France. So family duty calls me to the beaches of Normandy. However, we're still not very far from what's going on in French politics and UK politics, obviously, here. And I've been covering a bit about the forthcoming World Cup and the attacks on star striker French Les Bleus captain Kylian Mbappe by the French far right.
Very interesting. Something I know you've been following as well, because you always follow it closely, events across the channel. We'll be getting on to carry on Westminster later in the programme, but this week has seen another controversy, a £5 million gift to the Reform leader, Nigel Farage. What's your take on this?
Absolutely, an absolute scandal. And Nigel Farage received this money from a crypto billionaire, Christopher Harborne, based in Thailand, who's also donated millions and millions of pounds to Reform. And at first he said it was for his personal security and said he never had to declare it, though he received it shortly before he was elected in 2024. And later, in a subsequent interview, he said it was his reward for campaigning for 27 years for Brexit. So there are multiple investigations launched, and it could even prompt another by-election in his Clacton seat. But the question is, will he benefit from this kind of criticism, or will it actually be a nail in his political coffin finally?
Well, this is what he said on the issue when asked about it this week.
This was given to me as on an unconditional basis, completely unconditional basis, but frankly, it was given as a reward for campaigning for Brexit for 27 years.
And it had no impact on your decision to come back into public life?
No.
But he who pays the piper picks the tune.
Hang on a second. I can't be bought by anybody.
Yeah? Look down that camera and say, I can't be bought by
anybody.
anyone.
No, not anyone. Not even Elon Musk.
Emma Kate, thank you as always. Good to have your insights tonight. Good to have you with us. Let's go across the other side of the channel. Let's go to London. Let's bring in James McIntyre. Good evening to you, James.
Good evening. Great to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you. James is journalist, author, political biographer, author of the books Gordon Brown, Power with Purpose, and Ed, The Miliband's, and The Making of a Labour Leader. Formerly politics editor of Prospect, political correspondent for The New Statesman, reporter for The Independent, and much more. James, let's start with Gordon Brown. You've written a book about him, entering stage left suddenly this week, coming back into politics. What have you made of that? What's he been doing?
That's right. I mean, he obviously decided when he got the call from Keir Starmer in number 10 that you can't say no if the Prime Minister asks you for help in a crisis. And personally, I thought it was perhaps sort of slightly misguided to come to the aid of Keir Starmer, who I think has come to pretty much the end of the road now. But, you know, he did his duty as always, and he's increasingly respected in this country, probably the most respected former Prime Minister of all of the, I think, 7 or 8 living Prime Ministers now. And certainly I think it had an effect in the Labour Party. I think it did have the desired effect of shoring up support in this extraordinary week we've seen here, in which, you know, Keir Starmer has found himself in serious trouble. But I'm looking forward to discussing that and Wes Streeting and so on in the coming minutes.
Well, I know that you were due to interview Wes Streeting earlier this week and he cancelled suddenly, so you had an inkling that something was going on. It's going to be fantastic to have you and your analysis as well, James. Let's complete the lineup. Let's go to Hamburg. Welcome Adrian Geiges, writer, journalist and author. Good evening to you, Adrian.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. It's brilliant having you on. Former Moscow correspondent for RTL, Spiegel TV in the 90s. Adrian was later Beijing correspondent for a decade with the German weekly Stern. He's literally lived the story in Brazil. He spent a year in the Rio favelas for the documentary and the book, Brazil is Burning. He is a prolific writer, including as co-author of the internationally acclaimed Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world. Adrian immediately grabs your attention, this contested title of your book here, The Most Powerful Man in the World. Would Trump do well to read it?
Yes, he would do very well. And I think this week is, I mean, the confirmation that this title had been right. Because, I mean, in this summit, I mean, Xi Jinping is the winner. And this summit is poor in results. But still, I think it is a historic summit because later it will be remembered as a summit when in the past, the most powerful man in the world was a US president. And here, these days in Beijing, we have clearly seen now the leader of the Chinese Communist Party is the most powerful man in the world now.
A transference underway, discuss, which we will. The other thing I'd like to get your take on, President Xi gives little away, and certainly in terms of his demeanour, that the Xi creation appears to be a closely guarded and deliberate myths created. Is it fair to say he had a very difficult, traumatic childhood? And just tell us one of the lesser-known facts tonight about him that might help inform our understanding.
Yeah, I mean, he is a complete different personality from Donald Trump. I mean, to make his life story, which we tell, of course, in the book in detail, to make it short, I mean, he's the child of a high leader of the Communist Party. His father was the vice premier under Mao, but then he fell in disgrace and the Cultural Revolution began, and also Xi Jinping was sent to the countryside and lived under terrible conditions there. But he didn't take the consequence like many others in his generation to become a critic of communism or to go into business or something. He took the consequence to even be more strong supporter of the system, not to repeat this destiny. And he 10 times tried to become a member of the Communist Party, 10 times was refused, but he tried it another time and became a member. And so he is a convinced communist. And like Donald Trump, who thinks about only about his TV appearance like 2 hours later, Xi Jinping has the vision to make China, and he means China under leadership of the Communist Party, to the #1 country in the world.
Well, as you've just demonstrated, your insight is going to be invaluable tonight, Adrian. OK, let's get started. We'll begin in the western side of Tiananmen Square, inside the Great Hall of the People on Thursday morning, face-to-face in front of the press. President Xi and Trump sat across a table and set out their opening statements. Now, the last time the two superpowers met was in the sidelines in San Francisco, 2023. President Biden described Xi as a dictator. He stood by that as well in remarks after. And before that, 2021 in Alaska, the former US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, began by raising human rights issues in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber hacking. China's top diplomat in return criticised US democracy, foreign policy, accused the US of condescension. There was none of that this time round. Pleasantries from President Trump, perhaps even deference. Notably, President Xi reached into the classics of ancient history to describe the current standoff. 5th century war between the superpowers back then, Athens and Sparta. Let's not fall into the Thucydides trap, he said.
中美两国能不能跨越所谓的修昔底德陷阱，开创大国关系的新范式？能不能携手应对全球挑战，为世界注入更多的稳定性？
The Thucydides trap, as coined by Harvard scholar Graham Allison, is a lesson from ancient Greek historian who said the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War was down to the rise of the then-emerging power Athens and the fear it instilled in superpower Sparta that made war inevitable. So fear and loathing leads to war is what President Xi was tapping into. And once the press left the room, the two are said to have talked trade, tariffs, Taiwan, Iran and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. It's light on detail from Washington so far. We'll get into some of that. But later, as you do, a guided tour of the Imperial Temple of Heaven and an afternoon state banquet with business leaders in tow. By Friday morning, tea with Xi in Junnanhai, a secretive leadership compound, followed by a working lunch. Plenty of visuals, not so much granular information of what went down. Adrian, we go back to you. Just tell us what you made of President Xi pulling out the Thucydides trap statement. Was he essentially saying, we're after your mantle as world superpower, let's not make this difficult?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, he also said nice things about Donald Trump, but on the same time, he was very clear in substance by saying, for example, the main issue in the China-US relations is Taiwan. So saying, threatening, if you don't do towards Taiwan what we want you to do, for example, not support Taiwan with, if you support Taiwan with arms, then this will be a problems in our relation, which can even lead to clashes, as he said. So he was very clear what he wanted, and Donald Trump wasn't clear at all. He walked around like a tourist saying, oh, everything is great, China is beautiful. So he always portrays himself as a strong leader, but he was very weak in this summit.
Doug, and there's something you've picked up on was a tour around the secret kind of garden of President Xi and how impressed he was and wanted to know who else had been there.
Yeah, it reverts, right? Everything defaults to Trump and his persona. Do you take other leaders here to this special garden? And, Xi Jinping plays him like a violin. I mean, he knows exactly which strings to pluck with Donald Trump. And he basically says, no, I don't take every leader here. Oh, but he adds, Putin, yes. So, he plays the manipulation perfectly. He hits all the right notes. He seems to be a sort of master strategist in how to deal with Donald Trump. But it is interesting because Donald Trump, it seems, when he's actually face to face often with these, I'll put it mildly, like these autocratic leaders, let's call them, with autocratic tendencies, he defaults to this deference that you don't see when he's not with them, right? When he's not with them, he bashes them. The tweets come flying and all of this. I mean, this week alone, right, overnight Monday before he made this visit, he tweeted, I think was his record, 55 times in 3 hours until 1:13 a.m. in the morning. Tweets bashing Biden, Obama, real and perceived enemies left and right. And here he is sitting before what he might legitimately consider a real enemy, being told essentially, no, Taiwan could lead to a clash or conflict, watch out essentially, and there's no pushback. There's nothing. He defaults to deference. And that, I think, was my real big takeaway from this two-day gathering. Not long, but enough.
It's a very interesting point, Emma Kate, from Doug, kind of the two President Trumps that we've seen, and particularly on Taiwan, the conundrum of Taiwan in a nutshell. China claims Taiwan. Taiwan wants to stay independent. The US is stuck in the middle, committed enough to arm Taiwan, but deliberately vague about whether it will actually go to war to defend it. And of course, at the centre of this is the global AI race, the super chips that Taiwan produces. It's the heart right now of the US-China rivalry. And Emma Kate, to listen to President Trump with Xi, we heard he said nothing about it. But since he's got on the jet talking to reporters, and to Fox News, he's suggested that he would be against independence. Is that strategic ambiguity?
Yes, I mean, he hasn't at least confirmed long-standing US policy, which is to support Taiwan and for it to remain independent from China. And he also refused to be drawn on the question of already signed, I think, $14 billion arms sales to Taiwan. But I think, as the panel has pointed out, this deference that Trump has towards autocrats and dictators, and it's similar with Putin. And I think it was highlighted by John Bolton, who was in his administration, is now being sued, his former administration now being sued by Donald Trump. And he said that Trump thinks if he's friends with Xi, then US-China relations are in great shape. He calls him king and the greatest leader in Chinese history. But Trump thinks he's friends with these people, but I'll guarantee you that's not how they see Trump. They see him as an easy mark. So I think it's extremely dangerous what's occurred on this trip. There was no mention of human rights or democracy. Trump could not even come out with clear announcements about any specific financial deals or contracts. There was mention of perhaps something with Boeing, but it's very thin on the ground. And I think for the rest of the world, seeing Trump basically on a level with or even physically lower than Xi, because there was this photo op and the Chinese Communist Party had clearly constructed a chair that made Xi, who is shorter than Trump, look physically taller than him. So it was the symbolism, but also on Iran, it seemed like Trump was in there effectively pleading or begging and then being extremely, extremely deferential. So it's the most concerning for the future situation in Iran, but also about geopolitical balance on the world stage and the rise of China.
An easy mark, says Emma Kate, to our listeners and viewers in Nigeria. Mugu, it will be a familiar term. Adrian, let me ask you about what you think President Xi was looking for and what he got.
Yeah, he was looking for, as he pointed himself, Taiwan is the main issue, and he wants to pressure Trump not to sign this arms deal. And as it was just said, it's absolutely terrible that, Trump even discussed this with Xi Jinping. It was a principle since Ronald Reagan that the US, says, yes, there is one China in the world, but they never said that Taiwan is a part of the People's Republic of China and never has been. And it was a principle never to discuss with the Chinese leadership what to do with Taiwan and whether to give weapons to them or not. And that Trump went into this trap, even if he now, in this case, maybe should decide to a later time to send these weapons. But still, by even opening this box, he makes it very difficult for him to be strong against Xi. And Xi showed in this visit, in this summit, by flattering Trump, he can reach everything. And even it's not only this arms deal, it's even that Trump took over the propaganda of the Communist Party of China by saying that Taiwan for thousands of years would have been a part of China. No, that's not true. The real history was much more complicated. It was colonized by China some few hundred years ago, and then it was a Japanese colony, and it was never a part of the People's Republic of China. So Trump simply takes over the propaganda of the Communist Party of China.
Well, Taiwan right now is arguably the most strategic, important real estate on the planet. It accounts for 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chip capacity, the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. That alone controls 64% of global contract chip making. Every US tech company depends on it, and the AI race depends on it as well. James, just let me bring you in at this point. What do you make of the power play on show, the theatrics, the demeanour of President Trump, and also just listening to Adrian saying that the most powerful man in the world, as he sees it, is President Xi?
Yes, I agree with Adrian. Excuse me. And I agree with all of your panel. I also think it's excellent that as a program, you're focusing on the Taiwan issue, which is so important and, often overlooked in other media, because it's clear that, as Adrian was saying, Trump is kind of the weaker of the two figures. And, he's seen as this strong man by some of his base back in the US. But it's clear that on the world stage, because of his completely transactional approach, his sort of amoral and transactional approach, he's sort of for sale. And, he is in that sense weak and neglecting the West's kind of obligations, partly by undermining NATO. And if I were Taiwan, I'd be pretty concerned, not least because resources are being, heavily sort of plunged into the kind of pointless, never-ending, whatever you want to call it, but Iran adventure. Yes, I think your panel is absolutely right from what I can tell, that Trump is looking very, very sort of up for grabs on the world stage.
Up for grabs on the world stage. What wasn't up for grabs tonight, Doug, was the Strait of Hormuz. There's no movement on that. Just a brief thought, a fair summary here, given that President Trump, those weapons deals with the next two with Taiwan will still go ahead. Yes. So strategic ambiguity is still maintained to an extent. Is it fair to say, arguably, the summit, the state visit didn't suit either side perfectly, but it went the way that both can live with for now?
Well, yeah, I mean, both deliver to the extent that we already have seen Trump. Trump will walk away and spin it the way he wants. If he loses a war, it will still be a victory because it doesn't matter. Remember when Stalin said it doesn't matter who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. So all that really matters is the spinning, and he's already, playing up what he calls a hot success from this visit. But look, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket science to just look at the reality as he flies, wings it back to Washington. Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. There is no concrete deal, at least no specific detail in terms of a commitment or engagement from China to apply its pressure on Iran to reopen that strait. The oil prices at this hour as we speak continue to go up and up and up. I think Brent was about 109 before we walked into this studio here. And there is no absolute guarantee. In fact, I would say to the contrary, that somehow China, through this so-called axis of evasion, will continue to give Iran the components it needs for the types of weaponry that it needs.
Dual-use components that President Trump has written to President Xi. He wrote to him last month in April, didn't he, to say, please stop sending them? President Xi said, we're not sending them.
Nothing was resolved. None of the thorny issues, nothing. Zero.
Okay. So, and just a recap for the Strait of Hormuz and Iran. China depends on, for Iran, 80% of its oil goes to China. For China, 13% of its oil comes from Iran. That's why there's an influence and leverage that Trump at one point said he wanted. Right, from the most powerful men in the world across the channel to, well, let's say the latest in the political drama that is carry on Westminster playing out at the time of writing. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who's having a midterm crisis. Well, it was 1 o'clock on the dot Thursday. The letter came in from his Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, published. Dear Prime Minister, it began. Last week's election result was unprecedented, both the scale of defeat and the consequences of that failure. You have many strengths I've admired, but, of course, there's a but coming. We need vision. We have a vacuum. Where we need direction, we have drift. This was underscored by your speech on Monday. You also need to listen to your colleagues, including backbenchers, and the heavy-handed approach to dissenting voices diminishes our politics. Ouch. Was he firing the starting gun for a leadership challenge? He didn't say directly. Nobody has yet. For any of the party to stand, they have to have the numbers, more than 80 MPs backing them to trigger a leadership contest. And the wagons are certainly circling around Keir Starmer too. He and his supporters argue a change from him as Prime Minister will bring the country into chaos when there's nearly 3 years left to turn things around. James, is Keir Starmer ending a week in a better or worse position than he started it?
That's a great question. Certainly Monday, Tuesday, it looked to me and many others that he wouldn't last the week. But okay, he's dug in and he has lasted the week. But there are so many twists and turns still to come. We've got the more Mandelson files to come. And of course, it was Keir Starmer who appointed Peter Mandelson to ambassador in Washington, knowing about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We've got leadership candidates circling, as you say. Now, you mentioned earlier, it's true that I was due to interview Wes Streeting on Tuesday of this week, and he cancelled on Thursday the previous week. And it was clear that he was preparing a bid. In fact, he cited, quotes, emerging commitments. It was code for, he's going to be doing other stuff. It was clear that he was planning to run. There's no denying that. Now, does he have the numbers? I don't know. He says he does. His opponents, particularly in Downing Street, say that he doesn't. But let's just zoom back slightly. It's tempting to say that, there's all been drama and chaos and all the rest of it, but there is a reason behind it. Keir Starmer, has failed to connect with the electorate. Yes, he won a big majority at the general election, but the last general election, but he won really because the Conservatives lost. And, he doesn't have a vision, as Wes Streeting said in his letter. He is incoherent. He doesn't seem to know what he stands for. He's now focusing on kind of anti-racism with a big march, a nationalist march this weekend. And that may be the direction he goes in, but he has previously pandered to reform to his right and, tried to crack down on immigration. He just is all over the place. So I've never supported Keir Starmer. I'm sympathetic to the Labour Party. I'm a journalist, but I'm sympathetic to Labour, but I've never quite thought that Starmer had what it takes. And it's clear that, as Wes Streeting says, he won't lead Labour into the next general election. Then you've got the Burnham question. Well, he doesn't have a seat, but he's now secured the candidacy of a by-election in Makerfield. But he may not win that. It's possible that Labour can't win any by-election in the current climate. So it's very unclear. I also would just add that, I do think Wes Streeting has flair. He's sort of the Wayne Rooney of the cabinet, as Tony Blair used to call David Miliband. And he does also have a kind of authentic vision, I think, for taking Labour forward. But, and people are saying he's now backed. The British media are saying tonight he's backed Andy Burnham. I don't think that's quite right. I think he will still run in a contest. Whether Angela Rayner will or Ed Miliband a second time, remains to be seen.
I'm just scratching my head for other analogies now. Is Keir Starmer the Marcus Rashford? He just can't find his form. But Emma Kate, you've written about Starmer this week. You've called it counterproductive self-sabotage for the party.
Yes, I mean, I have another opinion. I feel like there's a lot of people who actually feel for and feel sorry for Keir Starmer. And actually, he has laid out a fairly clear vision, but who's listening? Ever since he was elected less than 2 years ago, there's been a far-right campaign of hate and disinformation pushed by Elon Musk, Nigel Farage, and even Russian disinformers online. It started with race riots in the summer of 2 years ago. And ever since then, it's been extremely hard for him, obviously, to sell his message. He's not the world's most charismatic prime minister. However, on the international stage, he's been very effective, a real leader when it comes to Europe and Ukraine with Emmanuel Macron. And in fact, this week, I mean, I noticed yesterday the Chancellor Rachel Reeves saying that the Labour Party should not put at risk by plunging the country into chaos, put at risk the economy. So the UK economy actually grew in the last quarter. Waiting lists for the NHS, the health service, are down. And there's also been a big drop in arrivals of asylum seekers or aspiring refugees by boat, which has been obviously a political hot potato exploited by Nigel Farage and the far right for many years. So I tell you what, he's a tough leader. He is the leader of Labor, who dispensed with Jeremy Corbyn, the far-left disgraced former leader who had to be pushed out because of his tolerance of anti-Semitism in the party. And that's more than 6 years ago. And so I wouldn't write off Starmer's chances. And in fact, Wes Streeting, the resigned health minister, clearly doesn't have the numbers. But the problem is that plunging the party into a three-way contest when the Prime Minister isn't even halfway into his term. I mean, at our magazine, at The New World, I mean, there are a few comments, reports, including, columns by Alistair Campbell, who used to work for Labor, and say this is not the time necessarily to push Starmer out. And in fact, this is exactly what Reform wants. And so the London Standard newspaper, which is owned by the son of a Russian oligarch, had on its front page, and it was reposted by Nigel Farage just before the municipal elections, "Get Starmer out." So I think Labor need to be clear-eyed about this and focus more on Nigel Farage and his corruption.
The question is it what Reform wants? Because at the same time, you've got members of his own party, his own cabinet, his inner circle, West Streeting. We read it from the top. The vision, which is a vacuum, the direction has become drift. It was, this is an et tu brute moment. And yet you've got Andy Burnham, James, you've got the Mayor of Manchester. I listened to all of the broadcast Vox Pops from Sky, BBC, elsewhere, international. I didn't find one person in the Vox Pops, which is unusual, who said, I won't vote for Andy Burnham. He's clearly got popularity. He's clearly the bookie's favourite. And perhaps the other argument within the UK is that this is the person who will beat Reform in the polls. What's your take? And if so, why?
Yes, I think to be fair to Andy Burnham, and indeed to your point, he clearly has massive appeal in Manchester and the region there and the north of England. And he's got, he's a good social democrat. He's got a sort of fairly coherent, agenda, although he's quite light on policy. I mean, there's a lot of mythology around Andy Burnham. I think people project their hopes and dreams in the Labour Party onto Andy Burnham. It's not quite clear, exactly what direction he's going to take the party in so far. But as I say, I think that we shouldn't yet write off West Streeting. Just to the point about Keir Starmer and sympathy for him, and now's not the time. I would say that if you look at it in a kind of clear-eyed way, as West Streeting said, Starmer probably won't lead Labour into the next general election. From a Labour point of view, he shouldn't, because he will lose it. It's crystal clear. So you need to kind of rip off his leadership like a sticky plaster. Do it quickly. The problem with West Streeting is he's dithered and he has hesitated, and he's doing it in stages. He really, perhaps, if he does have close to the numbers, and even if he doesn't have the numbers, he should have declared his candidacy, arguably, and then people might have, floated towards him. So now we're waiting for this kind of theoretical position where Andy Burnham gets back into Parliament and then the party rallies round him. But he needs to set out, he's not unpleased with himself, Andy Burnham. He needs to start thinking about what he's actually going to do when he's leader. But yes, there's certainly a feeling in London, in the lobby, in the House of Commons and so on, that there's an inevitability around him taking over in the coming months.
Very interesting. By the time you're listening on the podcast version over the weekend, maybe somebody has already officially gone over the top and challenged Sir Keir Starmer. To the leader of France now, President Macron, who on Monday morning was at the University of Nairobi making a speech at the first French-African summit in an Anglophone country. He was on stage after the Kenyan President William Ruto told an audience that African nations were no longer seeking aid or loans in the old way. They should be on an equal footing. President Macron agreed just as well, he joked, because let's be honest, he said, we don't really have the resources for it either. He was in good spirits. The Economist described his tour as a week to create a new path, to reshape French ties on the continent, and commented it felt like his farewell tour. And President Macron acknowledged France had been outcompeted in Africa by China, Turkey, the UAE, India, while France and Europe was playing catch-up. More than 30 African presidents, deputies, prime ministers listened to President Macron's speech. And also, France committed €14 billion for investment in the continent on energy, technology, AI. And on artificial intelligence, he said he wants European and African firms to compete together.
A lot of solutions are made in the US or made in China. And when you speak about artificial intelligence, okay, a lot of us today are consumers. So I think we have a common fight, a common battle together of investment, which is to build our strategic autonomy for Europe and Africa. And if we build it together, we will be much stronger.
Emma Case, France's post-colonial policy of Franc-Afrique that was declared over by President Macron at the start of his first term. This is a late pivot to English-speaking Africa. Was it a success?
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, he certainly got a lot of media coverage, social media commentary, but I think there was a lot of substance there. I mean, I found an interview he gave to the Africa Report where he pointed out that this is definitely not like the France of before. And he said the paradox is we're not the predators of this century. Europeans may once have been, obviously acknowledging the colonialist past, but they are not now. And I think he really made the link between France's historic links, historic geopolitical, cultural and personal with the African continent. And he also spoke to, his own electorate, to French people, and he talked about double nationality, because in France there are millions of people who hold two nationalities, and some of them do come from countries within Africa. They have other nationalities from those countries. And he said that double nationality, contrary to the extreme right National Front and other figures on that part of politics, he said it's actually a treasure and an opportunity or une chance for France. So I think, he sent, this is important messages. It's easy, I think, for people within the French bubble to sort of write off his so-called farewell tours, but he's really setting out clear values about what it means to be French, but also to be outward-looking and relationships with the former colonies and with the non-colonies, the English-speaking countries like Kenya. So I think overall it was pretty much a success. His popularity has gone up in France, actually.
That is interesting. And actually, I should say, in Anglophone countries, in Nigeria and Kenya particularly, in polling, he does much better than he does in Francophone countries.
In fact, there was some Ipsos polling on the eve of this visit, which was conducted, let's say, on behalf of the French Foreign Ministry, but it showed that those who have a good image of France is soaring. In countries like Kenya, I think was 93% had a good image of France, English-speaking country. Nigeria, I think was 90%. Now, you understand, yes, for a lot of reasons that we were just talking about in the Francophone Africa and the Sahel, especially the countries France was kicked out of, right? Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali, it's considerably lower. They do not have a necessarily very positive image of France, just the worst. But I mean, just one thing I think, one takeaway from this is it's easy to be cynical, and there's no shortage of cynics and skeptics and critics of Macron's approach to Africa who say, oh, come on, is he really being genuine when he talks about this equal partnership, or is this just convenient political rhetoric because he needs to do some business, he wants new allies, he's up against it in Africa. France is now on the back foot with the US and China and India and Saudi Arabia and the UAE all trying to get in there. And you could say, you know what, this is obviously my personal take, but I do believe Macron comes by his Africa, if you want to call it tropism, his magnetism towards Africa. Honestly, remember, he did his first internship there as a young man. I think it was 2001 or 2002. He was in Abuja, Nigeria. He's always been attracted to Africa. And he's young. He's young, relatively young. Not as young as a lot of Africans. I think in Mali right now, the majority of the population is about 15 or something is the median age. But he's still relatively young, and he is the first French president born in the post-colonial, that is post-1960 generation. So I think he is being earnest. I think he's being genuine, even if it's hard for a lot of people to accept that because they want to sort of default to France is always going to be the colonialist. It's always going to have some ulterior motives in Africa.
A striking contrast. Jordan Bardella is 31 years old, so extremely young, with big contest ahead. I would like a minute. There's 2 points I want to raise. I've got a minute each with you. First of all, Adrian. President Macron entering the fray. This is a fiercely crowded market dominated by China. What are you making of this move?
Absolutely. It's very important what Emmanuel Macron is doing there. In my work on Xi Jinping, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative was an important point where China tries with economic means to get political influence all over the world. And in my work as a foreign correspondent, I've seen it, for example, in Angola, where there are hundreds of thousands Chinese workers who build their streets and buildings and so on, and which gives them not only oil in the case of Angola, but also a lot of political influence there. So it is very important that democratic countries like France are much more active there.
Very good point. Emma Kate, I want to touch briefly, I've got 30 seconds on this tabloid drama, the publication this week of an almost perfect couple, Paris Match journalist Florian Tardif, about the president's life with Brigitte, including what allegedly led to the infamous slap on the plane, le gifle, denied by Brigitte Macron. What have you made of it? Briefly, will you read it?
No, frankly, I mean, all the stories about Brigitte Macron after this horrible conspiracy theories spreading around, saying she was a man after so many years. I mean, I think can they just leave her alone and that couple alone? I think there's so many more important issues to focus on. The World Cup is coming, and I think this is just another bit of gossip that's being pushed by the conservative media in France and the far right Bolloré broadcasting empire. So no, I don't pay much attention to it. But if people want to read it in a celebrity magazine, go ahead. But there's absolutely no evidence for it.
Emma Kate, noted. Great to have you on the programme tonight. Thank you all. That's all we have time for. Another week of fantastic panellists, insight, years of experience that tonight I have totted up as well beyond the centuries worth of combined journalistic on-the-ground experience. Claude has got a long way to go before he can respond to that. Emma Kate Simmons in Normandy, usually Paris-based writer, editor at Frank Tireur and columnist at New World magazine. Thank you, Emma Kate. Have a lovely weekend. To James McIntyre, author of Gordon Brown, Power with Purpose, and Ed, The Miliband's The Making of a Labour Leader. Thank you so much to you, James, tonight. Hope you have a good one as well.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
And Adrian Gyges, writer, journalist, co-author of the internationally acclaimed Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world. Great to have your analysis tonight.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Adrian. And also the Front Against Freedom, Beijing, Moscow and their accomplices all over the world. And to Doug Herbert, who's with me in the studio, France 24's international affairs correspondent. Thank you, Doug. Plenty of cultural milestones to revel in this week. Kenneth Branagh returning to the RSC. After 30 years, he's back on the Stratford stage to play Prospero in The Tempest, and the Cannes Festival will be in full swing. But we'll end where we began. Eurovision, the final in Vienna on Saturday, will play out with the front-runner to win, Finland's Linda Lampienes and Pete Parkkonen. This is their entry, Lina Hayton, a.k.a. Flamethrower. It's got fire, it's got frenzy of violin, surely gets 2 points written all over it. That is the prediction anyway from this Paris jury. Good night, Vienna. We'll see you in 7 days for the world next week.